So I just finished my leak test on this. I want to take a little while to talk about sealing one of these up, what kinds of sealants you can use, the epoxies that I use, things like that. I still need to do a little bit of finishing touches on the outside where I had some drips that I carved off with a razor blade. You can see the dark outlines. I went ahead and sealed this up, and I used black silicone in here just so that it would be more visible where everything is. Anywhere where there's wood meets wood, I've redone it. I did have one section here that actually tore. As I was starting to do a leak test, the wood separated very slightly, and I ended up having to redrain the tank, fill that in, and reseal it. Now, when you go to seal these, the silicone that you use matters in a project like this. Something that I really like that is really good to use on a large project where it really matters is the Momentive RTV 100 series. Now I've used, I believe it's 106 is the black, 108 is clear. I went through 17 tubes of this. It's hard to get a hold of. I believe it's actually been discontinued. They still make some like safety red versions of this for high temperatures, but I think this one is gone. So I'm going to leave a link to the Amazon purchase page in the description. And I'm also going to leave a link to what is functionally the GE equivalent. It's not quite as good. You know, the Construction Series adhesives work really, really well. Now, if you have any experience with silicone, you know it's pretty easy to pull apart. It's pretty easy to tear, especially if it's been wet for a little while. And this stuff is crazy. So I've got this screw here that I use to puncture the actual jars with when I'm opening them, and I can't rip this off if I want to. Like, I've got a tear here that I made with a razor blade, and it's really hard to get anything off of this. I have to try really hard, and like the best I can do is little tiny itty bitty nubs of it, whereas normally you can just sort of twist it real hard and pull it all off. This stuff is amazingly strong. It is amazingly tear resistant. It holds really, really well. What I've done here is the windows I went ahead and put in with the Gorilla silicone because I like how it holds to acrylic really well. So the front sections here I used the Gorilla silicone, but along the inside edge I used this. Let me grab the camera and show you what I'm talking about. So here along the edge of the window on the inside, the edge of any acrylic sheet that's been cut is very, very rough. And anything's going to stick very well to that rough edge. So I've taken this really strong silicone and I filled in the gap around this window here with it so that it's up against the rough edge, it's up against the actual epoxy here, and it also seals in the Gorilla silicone, so I don't have to worry about any leaks forming because of the Gorilla silicone not having a full complete seal against the silicone. It's really hard to get a good solid seal layer on a vertical window being applied where you can't really apply pressure. So this is the method that I really like for doing that. You can see here I started with a white silicone. I thought that would be a little bit less ugly but still visible. I don't know how well that shows up on the camera, that's why I switched to the black. None of the silicone that's in here that you can see now, this gross line drawing effect, is going to be visible once the background and the substrate are in. This is just really to illustrate all of the places that I found it necessary. I wasted a bit of silicone on this, and anywhere along this baseboard, I just slathered a solid sheet. So the clear, I have a solid layer running the entire way around. That's fully an additional 7 tubes that you really don't need. I want this thing to last as long as I do, so I really don't want to be redoing it later. I get a lot of questions from people about the fact that so many of these silicones say not for underwater use, not for aquarium use. In the case of this particular one, the RTV 100 series, the company has essentially said, because this is a construction adhesive, we don't want people assembling construction components that are going to be underwater with this. We think that there's other ways to do that. But it doesn't really apply to aquariums. As far as we know, people have been using this to build aquariums. Many aquarium manufacturing companies have been using this for decades with no problems, and we say that it's safe to use. That's not something you see from a lot of things. I don't know where GE stands on the SCS series. I believe most GE Silicone is actually just relabeled Mementive stuff. I know the GE Silicone 1 is. It's just a relabeled, really, really garbage formulation of this. Well, not of this, but Mementive made a really crap one. So, it's worth checking out, but I would recommend this above anything else. This is amazing, amazing stuff. I really, really like this. It is more expensive than most silicones, but this is basically indestructible. I really like this stuff. So I went a different route this time in epoxies. Normally I will use a Cortec V400, which is a polyamide epoxy. I like it a lot. The thickness is really easy to work with. It sticks to walls pretty well. It doesn't have major issues with dripping, and it cures quickly enough that I can do a couple of coats without having to worry about it in a day. You do one in the morning, one in the evening, one the next morning, and you're done. But it's very, very high in volatile components that really make it difficult to use inside. So I tried a couple of the things. The first thing I did was Cortec V430, which is the 100% solids epoxy for coating concrete. It is a cycloaliphitic epoxy. They don't say that on the container, but if you look at the spec sheets, it is. This is basically equivalent to Pond Armor. It's just significantly cheaper. There are some good and some bad with this. It's odor-free, essentially. I mean, it had less smell than latex paint does, which was really nice, but its application was a little bit weird. It auto-levels, so it smooths itself in weird ways. There was a little bump where I applied this as a test on some sheet to pull it off. You can see it sort of leveled around it, and it didn't really coat it real well. So this little lump of stuff isn't coated well at all. I would think I would probably need about 3 additional coats on this before I would be happy with it. It's also very, very smooth, so I would consider this a pretty big fall hazard. It is fairly thick, so it's hard to spread, but it's also pretty runny, so it gets very thin very quickly. It does stick to metal much better than polyamide, so if you've got internal framework that is metal and you don't want to coat it with Bondo or something, this is going to stick to that better. Polyamides just peel right off. It is pretty flexible when it's thin. I've misplaced my sheet that had multiple layers on it. The multiple layers were pretty brittle. They snapped pretty easily when I bent them, but it's not terrible. It's not like the resin that comes in fiberglass kits that just forms brittle crackers that shatter. So this is pretty good on flexibility. I don't think that I would want to use this again because cleanup was a headache. I don't like having to wear safety stuff. I tend to work with chemicals that are pretty safe. Polyamide epoxies, when you get them on you when you're working, you run some water over it and rub it, and it basically just flakes off as long as you're within the first 2 hours. And this stuff is a big gooey mess that, you know, if you end up with a tear or something in your glove, it's really hard to get this crap off of you. And the solvents that thin this out really aren't safe. Despite what Pond Armor claims, cycloaliphitic epoxies are not safe. They are not non-toxic. Even the safety data sheets for Pond Armor very clearly say that they are not non-toxic. That company is just full of bananas. Because of how smooth this is, new layers don't really stick. So while this was usable, it's pricey and I didn't really like it. The other thing that I used was Epoxy 646. Now you can tell this is very thick compared to, you know, this paper thin piece here. This is 4 layers worth. It's still very flexible. I really wish I could find the thicker cycloaliphitic so that I could show you a comparison. This is still very, very flexible. If you force it to bend over completely, it will snap. You know, it's not like a piece of leather. But for what it is, there's a lot of flex here, which is very good for something that you're not 100% sure is going to be rigid. This was much lower odor than the Coratec V400 that I normally use. I was able to do about 2 to 3 liters at a time of application of this without having to ventilate the building at all. It smelled strongly, but there wasn't enough to cause any sort of lightheadedness or anything else. The Coratec, about 2 liters is enough that if there's not constantly ventilation, it gets dangerous. But this, at one point, I think I used 6 liters at one time, which is, you know, a gallon and a half. And it was really strong. I was a little bit lightheaded in the tank because there was no place for the fumes to go. But it wasn't bad enough that it caused issues. We get a lot of feeder rats that have, you know, pneumonia and stuff because the guy we buy them from, they all use pine chips and it causes lung infections, and none of them died from it. So this is a much lower odor thing. I definitely wouldn't do more than, you know, like I said, 2 to 3 liters at a time just for safety. But I like this a lot. It goes on pretty thickly, it sticks to itself very well, and it's not super smooth. There's always a texture to it. I don't know, I mean, this one's got a bubble, so it's, you know, ignore that. But I don't know if the texture here will show up. You can see it's got a bit of a sheen, but there's still a texture, whereas this one is just perfectly smooth. Other than the folds from the bend where it's around my thumb and hanging, it's perfectly smooth. So this is dangerous to walk on if it's at all wet. This, I'm not worried about. You know, even if I don't put down a substrate, I'm not going to be worried about walking around on this until it's so covered in biofilm that there's an issue. And you can see the water's about half empty. I have had it completely full for about 3 days. I'm going ahead and draining it now so that I can start working on the background tomorrow. This does take about 17 hours to drain using a pump to drain it, so that's fun. When you do a test like this, if you've got something very large, I very strongly recommend you only fill it up to about here to start, and that gives you a good idea of whether you've got any leaks on your base. You really don't want to go larger than that, because if you do have a leak, my leak where the baseboards here split didn't show up for about 6 hours. So let it sit with just about 4 or 5 inches of water in it overnight at least to make sure that nothing's going to happen before you add more. After you're above your baseboards, there's not really much that's going to happen. You're going to have leaks that come out around screw holes or things. So as long as you've sealed your up and downs, there's not really any danger. I just definitely wouldn't fill the tank completely the first time. Only do somewhere from like 4 to 10 inches, so you're not stuck draining for 16 hours while your tank is leaking inside. The windows on this, I know, are kind of weird in that there's so many different windows here. One of the things that I brought up when I initially started working on this was that this entire tank is really designed to cost less than one of the windows in the big concrete behemoth the King of DIY did. And I came up with this design because, you know, yeah, it's bigger than his, but it has much wider view angle. So the entirety around here, you can see what's going on. Now, this doesn't let me put like an arapaima in. You know, maybe he could get away with an 11-foot fish. I can't do that. I can't do anything larger than, say, an 80 or 90-pound pacu. But I think this gives a much better view angle. It fills up a lot less of the room overall. And these windows, because they are only 24 by 36, you're actually able to use 1/2-inch thick acrylic on this, which is where most of the savings come in. So I'm going to go ahead and link the windows that I use down in the description. You want to make sure if you're getting 1/2-inch windows that you get cast acrylic and not extruded acrylic. Extruded acrylic is much less strong, and 1/2-inch is where sometimes it's one and sometimes it's the other. Now, the guy I ordered these from in Florida, he took a while to ship them. They were having a hurricane at the time, so I'm not going to fault him for that. His communication isn't great, but his prices are pretty good. So, I don't know what these normally run. The business price on Amazon for these is about $65 each. So, you know, I had to get 6 of these at that. This other window I got on a special for 15 bucks. So you're looking at $315 for all 7 windows for everything in here. As before, you know, the links to everything that I'm doing is over on the Patreon page. You can check it out over here. If you like what I'm doing, you know, go ahead and support us. That's always good. Otherwise, it's free to anybody. We're not going to hold any of these things ransom. So, check that out. I've also got the schematics for the actual woodcuts and things up there now. I think I missed that on the last video. So at this point, as soon as this is drained, I'm going to start working on the actual background. I'm not 100% sure what I want to do. I'm thinking if I want to start sand on this side, work it around to rocky gravel about by the midpoint, and then move into larger rocks on the other side. There are a lot of variations in the environments in the Amazon and Orinoco Basin, so I'm going to try to do something that any of the fish that I get are going to feel at home in. They're going to find something that they can comfortably work with. The back wall itself, there's about 35 linear feet that I've got to work with, including the walls. So I haven't really decided what I want to do on that, if I just want to do like a fake mud and rock with some tree stumps and tree roots and then some other plants with live roots coming down, or if I want to do a hard rocky wall. If you guys have some thoughts on what you think would look cool, go ahead and leave it in the comments. I'd like to know what other people think. I am working on sourcing some tree stumps so that I can put throughout the tank to make a little bit of a flooded forest feel for part of it. That's something that helps to trigger some natural behaviors with some fish. I'm not really interested in trying to get things in here breeding, but it can still make them feel a little bit more at home. So that's all I've got for this week. We'll start on some more exciting craft things that are more of a hands-on how-to-do sort of thing with the next video. This one, you know, it's really mostly just, here's what I used, here's how I did it, and I'm going to leave the rest up to you, because somebody holding your hand on something really simple can be really frustrating. If you guys have questions about any of this, anything that I did, any of the sources that I've had, leave a comment and I'll get back to you as soon as I'm able to. Or if it's something that really warrants more in-depth answer, I'll make a video response. Coming up, like I said, we're going to be doing the backgrounds. We're going to be doing custom substrates for nutrient infusion into baked clay, things like that, to save some money. There's no way I'm going to get away with any of those aqua soils that are super expensive doing this. That would be thousands of dollars of soil. So we're just going to be using some of the cheap safety absorbent stuff and making our own from that. So we'll see you in the next one. If you like this video, don't forget to subscribe. And go ahead and hit that thumbs up button.